Yeah?
Yeah.
So The Order is the first big PlayStation 4 exclusive of 2015, a game that's been talked about for a while, coming from Ready at Dawn Studios, the guys behind a bunch of PSP exclusives, the God of War PSP games, Daxter, I think was the first time I heard of them. A good pedigree on PSP, and this is their first chance to have a go at a big AAA game and their own IP. It is the story of it's basically the Knights of the Round Table have lived since the time of King Arthur, and now they're an order of knights in 19th century London, 1886 to be specific to the game, that have to just kind of keep the citizens from dangerous stuff happening, namely, in this case, Lycans, werewolves. And it's fundamentally a third-person cover shooter, Gears of War rip-off, basically, but with a heavy emphasis on story, performance-captured acting, incredible graphics, probably the best visuals we've seen on console, and yeah, it's kind of strong emphasis on kind of cuties and cutscenes, which has upset a lot of people, I think, because there is plenty of times where you're not kind of interacting with what's happening on screen, or your level of interaction is very basic. But I have to say, like, throughout the course of what is about a 7, maybe 8 at a stretch, if you're playing on hard mode, which I did, our game, I thoroughly enjoyed it. It's an extremely simple game. It doesn't do a huge amount new at all. It does stuff that other games have done better. In fact, I wouldn't say it's as good as a Gears of War, even the first one. But it handles its combat well. I like the fact that the cover system is slightly different to almost every other cover game, as in when you're behind low cover, the camera doesn't peek up over the cover naturally. You actually have to pop your head out in order to be able to see what's going on. It's a small change, but it makes the firefights slightly more frenetic. Most of the time you'll be fighting human enemies with middling AI. I wouldn't say... No, I mean, none of that side of the game is particularly special, but it kind of makes up for it by looking so good and throwing in a couple of excellent weapons. This really is a very, very simple game. It is not a great game by any stretch of the imagination. It is not a classic, but I found it enjoyable, looked incredible. I was engaged by the standard of the acting, if not necessarily the plot. Is it again a kind of basic plot surrounding this slightly supernatural force, and what is an interesting setting, but it's hardly the kind of story that's going to break new ground. But the characters and acting was strong enough to keep me engaged. While it is cutscene heavy, it's not. I mean, there are other games I've played, plenty of other games that I've played that are this cutscene heavy. So it's not something that's hugely problematic. It does have a slow start, but once you get into the action, there are some cracking levels towards sort of the middle part of the game, really, and it kind of doesn't stick around too long. And there's quite a lot of variety to the levels, some stealth. I mean, I really don't want to overstate how good this game is. It isn't a great game at all. It's just a sort of serviceable, incredible-looking action romp, which for me was a nice counterpoint to all these mammoth open-world games that I've been playing recently, which have their own benefits and downsides. The Order 1886 was just a fun thing to do. I mean, there's a question of value. It's quite an expensive game for something so short and something with little replay value in a traditional sense, in that there's no reason apart from just experiencing the game again to go back in, or maybe some trophy hunting. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't enjoy it. I really did, and would be happy to pay and play a sequel. But I've been taken aback, actually, by how upset and offended people seem to be by this game. 90% of which was happening before the game came out. People just decided to stick the knives in for some reason. But I just found it so utterly inoffensive. It was just a simple game with nice graphics that just kind of came and went, and that was about it, really. I was amazed at how upset people seem to be by what is, one of the most, it's almost bland games that's come along in ages. But I enjoyed it. I thought it was good fun.
Okay, I mean, that's fair enough. I mean, I didn't think a great deal of it. I mean, I didn't hate it, but I certainly wouldn't recommend it to anybody. Are you going to tell people to buy it?
It's difficult. It's one of those situations where, I don't like talking necessarily about how much it costs, because you never know whether you're talking to to people that we know that it would be quite expensive for, or if you're talking to someone who's on 200 grand a year and 50 quid is nothing. So in a broader sense, I don't like to talk about value because it's sort of very specific to me, but in terms of people that we know, I wouldn't recommend it because, you know, it's a good chunk of money for people with kids and whatnot. But if it turns up for a tenner, if you can borrow it, I mean, it's difficult. Someone might listen to this 2 years down the line when you can get the game for nothing on PS Plus, and then I'd recommend it. So yeah, it's one of those difficult questions. But right now, for someone in a similar life situation to mine, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it just because it is quite short-lived, and you can spend the same amount of money on a Far Cry 4 or a Dying Light, which will obviously give you more bang for your buck. But everyone's different. Everyone's financial situation is different.
Yeah. I mean, and so much has been written about that, and I've never had a problem with short games. Vanquish is 5-6 hours, and it's incredible. My problem with The Order is that it's so shameless in the ways in which it just treads water. I mean, it just feels like it's like conning people into thinking they're being served a meal when in reality it's just a waiter tap dancing around the table. Because so much of what's here is just slop. I mean, I don't know where to begin. I mean, there's a bit where you have to push something to reach another area, like a carriage. And in a Call of Duty or an Uncharted, that takes 5 seconds, fair enough. In The Order, not only do you do that bit twice in rapid succession, it takes the best part of 20 seconds each time. And I'm like, hold up. This is a computer game, isn't it? Hold up for 20 seconds. The first gunfight I got into was quite enjoyable because the gunplay is quite tidy and responsive for the most part, but I was in that first area for what felt like 10 minutes with enemies endlessly just basically dropping in my lap again and again from the same 2 spots. Just zapped all of the excitement out of the scenario by going on and on and on and on. And speaking of things that go on and on and on, the cutscenes are basically no better or worse than the cutscenes in most games. They're generic, the story's generic, the characters, blah, blah, blah. I mean, you know, they're not terrible. They're just, you know, supremely dull. But some of the cutscenes, I mean, there's one at a funeral for a character I didn't really know or care about, and it just goes on because the dialogue's filled with pregnant silences. This man died. And I'm so, don't be portentous and drawn out when you're like a 6-hour-long shooter. Please, just everything takes way longer than it needs to because it feels like they're trying to create the illusion of it being like a legitimate package. But and you're dumped in rooms where you have to just walk around picking stuff up and looking at it. This is a tech demo. It's the most visually amazing tech demo I've ever seen running on a console. And to be honest, that's going to be enough for some people. You know, when it knuckles down to being a shooter, it's more than passable. I mean, I encountered some issues with AOA. I don't think the AOA is that great at all. And I had some collision detection issues where, like, scenery that wasn't even in my view was kind of restricting my ability to get headshots. I mean, it only happened a couple of times, but when the package is as slender as this is, that sort of stops being acceptable, really. It looks like a game that's worth every single penny of the £50 or £60 asking price, but it feels like a game that should cost a £5. It's derivative and it's repetitive, and although it works quite well sometimes when it's just being a shooter, there's no reason to play this over any one of the multitude of other options that are available. But, you know, like, I mean, you will like this and feel that it's a worthwhile purchase if you're anything like my friend Joe, because my mate Joe used to love his Sega Dreamcast to death. It was his favourite console, and whenever someone new would come round to his place, he'd have to show it to them. And he wouldn't put a game on, he'd put on some demo disc that he had, and it was a tech display featuring the head of one of the characters from Shenmue, and you could rotate it. I don't know if you ever... I mean, at the time it was amazing. It was like by candlelight, and it was just like, it looked incredible. But rather than prove that it had worthwhile games on it, he was more proud of how powerful the box was. He's like, you know, look at how powerful the thing in my living, you know, look at what that thing can do that's in my living room. So if that sounds like you, knock yourself out. I think your enthusiasm will be validated all day long because it is an amazing looking game. Visually it's amazing, although it clearly, I mean, I wish it wasn't so dark. You clearly realise that the lighting effects are what makes it look so special. So everything's dark. There's a couple of data. I mean, it's almost all. If it's not set at night, it's in dark places. So that gets a little bit repetitive. I mean, the game is anything from 5 to 12 hours long, depending on who you talk to, and some of those people would have liked a longer experience, whereas I would have been much more impressed if everyone was just honest about everything and it was 2 hours long, because that's how long the actual game felt like to me. So I would definitely not recommend it, but it does look nice.